Grief is such an overpowering emotion, especially after losing someone so close to you. It can take months, years, even decades to get back to normal, if that's even possible after experiencing a significant loss. This podcast was created to help you move through and release the emotions, allowing you to heal the hurt and begin living again. Listen in as I chat with medical professionals, grief workers, and people who have first-hand experience in losing a loved one, what their experience has been, and what they did to help heal themselves and those around them. Life isn't always sunshine and rainbows, but I believe there is always a silver lining if you're willing to look. Welcome to the Release Podcast. Welcome to another episode of Release Grief Podcast. This was the thing that I forgot to check with her about before we went live, but you're going to hear me check right now. Like, how do I pronounce your name?
Quintina.
Quintina Sonnie, correct?
Sonnie, yes.
Perfect. I was like, I always try to ask ahead of time because I have thought some names were pronounced one way and I was completely humbled when they weren't. So I don't assume anybody's name is how I think it should be pronounced. So Quintina, and how do you pronounce the last name?
Sonnie.
Sonnie. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. It's all about grief. So I'm sorry you're here, but I love that you signed up to share your story. Can you tell me why you signed up? Like, what brought you here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in a lot of spiritual spaces and definitely love a lot of these newer age concepts. I love that we're looking at this as like a love and light type of thing, but I think that a lot of times we kind of bypass those really deep, dark feelings. And so being a somatic alchemist, that's what I call myself, that deals a lot with grief and those like lower emotions. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I have lots to talk about on this subject, but also I feel like my perspective on it and what I've been through can really be a catalyst to assisting people through their own grief. So I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I would love to do this. So here I am.
Oh, that's perfect. I'm just diving in. I was just telling another friend of mine, I have uh, a couple books that are talking about somatic healing and all those things. I haven't dove into them yet, so I'm excited for you to like walk me through this. So tell me what somatic healing is and what it looks like.
Yeah, so somatic is just another word for body based. A lot of people, when they're going through their healing journey, it gets really heady. A lot of those concepts that we talk about are a lot of we're very philosophical in a way, very like head and like mind based. But a
Mhm.
lot of the healing happens through our bodies because trauma is actually stored in our body, not in our brain. So, as you are moving through body based healing practices, you get the ability to actually move the energy out of the body instead of just trying to figure out how to work with it while it's still inside.
That makes so much sense. And I didn't even realize that that was the name for it because I was just talking to someone else on another podcast about releasing all of that energy that you're accumulating that keeps building up in your body and just releasing it by like yelling out into the void or going to a smash house and beating the shit out of stuff or something like that. Just giving that energy a place to go rather than storing it within and letting it, like implode you.
Exactly.
I love that
Because
explanation.
oh, thank you. Because like emotions are just energy in motion. So if they don't have a place to come out, they're going to come out, just maybe not when you want them to. So if you can give them a place to be seen, especially those lower emotions that we feel that we kind of tend to avoid, then they
Yeah.
can actually be seen and that's all they want. They just want to be seen and they just want to be given a platform. And so going to those smash houses, like you said, and things like that, and doing other somatic work is really going to help move all of that through, especially when you're working through grief.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. All the things. Yes. Yes. Thank you for giving words to what I was doing that I didn't even know. So now I'm even more eager to dive into my books,
Okay.
because I'm already doing some of the stuff. So anyway, so talk to me about some of the grief that you have experienced that brought you into the somatic work.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I am not, I am familiar with grief very deeply. Some of the things that I have been through in the past, I lost my grandmother who had adopted me when I was just a baby. I lost her when I was 10 to something that was completely preventable. She was a smoker. They were doing those surgeries where they were clearing people's arteries, and the tar from the cigarettes had, when they went in, had actually broken apart and caused multiple strokes. This was like a 98%
Oh,
success rate
wow.
surgery. Like it was such an anomaly. So, we weren't expecting, I wasn't expecting to lose my grandmother at that time. So that was really, really painful. And looking back now, I also lost my biological mother 2 years ago. And both of them passed away at the same age. And I was like, oh my gosh, is that going to happen to me? Like, this feels very like generational. This feels very, yeah, just very generational. And like, oh my goodness, how can I prevent the same, like, quote unquote demise, right? Like, am I going to do this again? And part of losing them, which kind of ties into my story of being a trafficking survivor, is that my mother was also trafficked. And I don't have any proof, but I definitely believe that my grandmother probably was in some way, shape, or form as well. So this is something that's generational. And I think that grief can really be passed down in that way of like, it's kind of like in us, in our cells, in our being sometimes, and in our lineage. So then when I became vulnerable to trafficking, which I can get into more of that, the thing that really got me was the loss of identity that I felt like I had. And not only grieving my only living maternal relatives and not really knowing past them, but also grieving like the identity within that I felt like I didn't have. Especially when you are trafficked, your trafficker will definitely go after those vulnerabilities, but they'll also manipulate you into believing that you're something that you're not. And then, of course, society will label you, and there's a lot of stigmas and assumptions around trafficking and what that looks like. So really my biggest grief was the loss of myself and the loss of that maternal side of me, the loss of that feminine essence. I just felt like, oh my gosh, like I'm the only one that can take care of myself. I feel like I have to just work and be masculine and I have to do everything by myself. And so that really was something that was so painful to move through. But then working with that grief and kind of understanding where it was coming from helped me to eventually move out of that.
Yeah. So when you talk about the trafficking, I can imagine, like, I don't know specifically what type of trafficking it was, but I can just imagine because I grew up, not that I was trafficked or anything. And this has no, like, it's not a comparative story to yours at all, but just, it is in a certain way, only the fact that I grew up having to rely only on myself. Um, we moved around a lot, and so I didn't make friends, and so I knew that if I needed to get something done, I had to rely upon myself. And it was a trust issue. It was nothing else but a trust issue. And so my knowledge of trafficking makes me assume that you had to believe in yourself, to trust yourself. No one else could do anything else for you because you were afraid of getting into that situation again. Is that
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, definitely. Especially after I finally was able to leave my trafficker, he made it feel like he was the only one who would ever understand me, love me, care about me, take care of me. So having that bond to him, which I would definitely call a trauma bond,
Right.
to him, because I don't have my biological maternal lineage to guide me any longer. It was such a deep manipulation because a lot of people feel like, well, if you're out there, and it was for me, it was sex trafficking, a little bit of labor trafficking, but mostly sex trafficking. So it's like, well, if you really didn't want to do that, if that was, if you really wanted to get out, then why didn't you just go? Why didn't you just leave? And the problem with that mindset and those thoughts is that when you are vulnerable and you don't have another way to, or you don't have anybody in your life that you feel like could take care of you, you're gonna lean on the person who is presenting themselves as that option. And so what was I going to do? Was I gonna leave the only person who said they cared about me and like proved it to me? No, because what else am I meant to do, right? And
Right.
I was so lucky to be able to have adopted parents. I did eventually have like my adopted family when I was 13. They took me in, but I was not biologically theirs. And I don't think a lot of people really think about the grief of even just having non-biological parents. Like they can love me all they want, they can do the best for me in any all these different ways, but it's nothing like what I wish that my mother could have, my
Right.
biological mother could have provided to me, or like my grandmother, having her ripped away from me in such a uh I didn't even know, very sudden way. So when I'm looking back, and when I do look back at those different uh identity crisis that I had, that shattered me in so many ways, because what I had to do in order to leave was then I had to figure, do I have enough semblance of an identity left to go on my own? Like you said,
Mhm.
like, do I even have enough of who I am at my core remaining after all of this manipulation and all of this, all of these traumatic instances that I had to experience? How am I going to make sure that I don't become vulnerable again and I don't go back? Because they have a statistic out there that about 2% of people who are trafficked actually leave their trafficking situations or get out of their trafficking, and even less than that will not have a recidivism rate. So like recidivism being like going back to it after they have
Right.
left. Maybe less than 1% will be able to get out and stay out continuously and not
Hmm.
go back to that lifestyle. And it's because we have a system problem where the systems are what are perpetuating these types of exploitations. So when people get out and then they get into like the real world where people are like, oh, just you're gonna be fine, they can't, because they still have the same vulnerabilities that led them to being exploited and trafficked. So with that, going back to like the grief of it all, is when you lose that identity and when you feel like you can't provide for yourself, or you feel like there's nobody in your corner, that aloneness and that isolation causes such a shattering of your soul and who you really are.
Oh, yes. Yes. So it makes me think, like, when you're in that situation, I know for me anyway, it was a lot of the lines of, do I believe that I am capable of taking care of myself in any situation
Yeah.
and removing it from this situation, because you're going from, a demon that you know to one that you don't. And
Yeah.
it's like it just changes shape, it changes, nuances, it changes, when you talked about society, and society plays a huge role on people, with trying to throw them into a box and contain them and make them feel a certain way to keep them controlled, which
Exactly.
is the same thing as what your trafficker is doing the same thing.
Exactly. So then when we think about the grief of losing ourselves in those situations, and the lack of support that you get when you come out of it, because I didn't really have, thankfully now I work for an organization that assists trafficking survivors, but when I got out, there wasn't really a ton of options for us. And so really thinking like, one, no one's going to believe me. That's the first thought.
Right.
Two, it's a criminal offense in a lot of states, for like prostitution, body place, things like that. So I can't go to the police because they're just going to arrest me and I'm going to go to jail. So it's like, where are my options? What
Right.
am I supposed to do now that I'm in a situation? And like you said, going from something that I knew, like at least trafficking was something that I knew. It was 3.5 years of this experience. So like when I got out, it was like, how do I even one, trust myself, like you said, and how can I trust others? Like, how do I know that I'm not going to be manipulated by somebody again? Like this person, my trafficker was such a charmer, somebody who like really laid it out there, like, I'm here to love and take care of you. And yet you exploited
Right.
me for 3.5 years.
Right.
So being able to not only trust myself, but being able to trust the world again was something that really I had to move through very, very deeply. It was a tough time for sure.
No, I could imagine. I could well imagine. What made you decide to leave? Like, what was the catalyst to be like, okay, I'm done. This is wrong. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't feel like they actually love me or have the best for me. What was the catalyst for that?
Yeah. I will die on this hill that it is not a choice to be trafficked, but it is a choice to get out and stay out. Because again, with how deep that those roots are of the control and manipulation that you experience, you do have to choose every single day to get out because and stay out because your vulnerabilities are still there potentially, right? Especially if you don't have services, whatever your vulnerabilities might be. So for me, it was the threatening of my life. He literally put a loaded gun to my head. And so it was like, that was this thought in my mind of either he's going to kill me or I have to leave. And it was wild because I even had to be strategic about how I left. I didn't even leave that same night. But that
Mhm.
was the thing in my head that was like, oh, he really does not care about me. Like he would kill me in this house right now. That sometimes, and most of the time, it has to be that extreme of a situation in order for it to click in our brains that, oh, you actually have been manipulating me. This isn't right. This isn't what I want to do. You don't care about me. Because all the way up until then, it's like the cycle of being going back and forth where it's like one day you're getting yelled at and choked out and all of these things for being bad or like not doing what you're supposed to, and then on the other side it's like, let's have a shopping spree, let's get your nails done, I love you so much, here's some flowers. Like the gaslighting and the back and forth is wild. So it's like, if that's the only person in your life that is really showing up for you in those ways to support you through those vulnerabilities or at least alleviate them, then you're going to be attached to that person, especially if you've had other instances of people either leaving or, in my case, passing away, people that were supportive in my life, not my biological mother, but my grandmother being a supportive person in my life. Um, having them pass was like, oh my gosh, I'm really like alone. Like I felt like I was alone. I really felt like I had no
Right.
one. So that extreme circumstance was the only thing that like flipped that switch in my brain to say, oh my gosh, I have to get out or he's going to kill me.
Hmm. Yeah. So I noticed you did not mention your father at all.
Yeah. Yeah. My pimp was my daddy. Yeah.
Oh,
Well, no, like
oh, I was like, what?
daddy, no. That's like a term that we use
Gotcha. Yeah.
in the life, but um no, I did not know who my father was until a couple of years ago. I still have never met him, but I did a DNA thing, and DNA
Mhm.
Angels helped me find him. It's a pretty cool nonprofit. So if anybody needs their biological parent found, they can help you. But yeah, so I did that, and that was the only way I was actually able to figure out who it was, because my mom did not know. My biological mother had
Okay.
no clue. She said maybe here's some maybe information, and ended up being that DNA was the only thing that was going to get me to find him.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, that's a whole other thing of like being raised by women and not having that father figure. So then my trafficker stepping in, that's why I made that joke earlier of like
Yeah.
stepping in as that father figure that I felt like I never had, because he was 11 years older than me. So it was weird because it was like he obviously that's like not enough time to actually be my father, but
Mhm.
he was older. He was that father figure to me. And also, it was like a romantic connection because I thought that we were in love. So it's such a weird thing. And you've probably heard that we pick our parents and our partners, and that was absolutely what I did with my trafficker.
How old were you, like, when you started seeing this guy?
I was 21.
Okay.
Yeah, so from 21 to almost 24 is when I was with him.
And I think of it as like we pick the people to fill the void that we feel that we have. Not necessarily like we pick our parents, but we pick for the void that is gone vacant within us. Um, or someone that, for women, a lot of the times we try to find someone that we can fix or help or whatever it is. And a lot of times these guys roll around and they're like, "Oh, I'm hurt. Can you help me?" And it's some weird thing, and they don't even say it like that. Like they make it seem like they're this big tough macho guy that only has your best interest at heart. When in reality, it's all a ploy. It's just a game that I shouldn't say guys, but people play, like women included,
Absolutely.
to snag someone of who they believe will fill that hole for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I want to touch on the point you brought up about like this is not just men. I want to
Mhm.
definitely preface that with like my experience was a man, but I definitely know all genders of traffickers, and I've seen different exploitive experiences play out with all genders. So this is definitely there's definitely a majority. I can definitely say that through experience, through research, and through my position at work. But yeah, it's not just men. So want to definitely
No, I
preface that.
could imagine it's not. Yeah, like I just have no words because and I think that people are trafficked more than what the society lets on about. And I think a lot of people don't even put two and two together that they're being trafficked. Like it's, you know,
No, exactly that. I had no idea that what I was experiencing would be considered trafficking. Like, I'm thinking that, oh, I'm just doing what I would normally do. Yes, I have a boyfriend, but I'm being paid for these other acts. Like it's consensual. Which is crazy because it is certainly not consensual. You can't consent when money is involved, especially because of the societal pressure that is put on money and having access to resources or anything of value. It could be rides, it could be your basic needs. Like there's lots of different ways
mhm,
that, what we'll call it value.
mhm,
When there's value transactions involved, there is no consent because you are doing something to have a basic need met. How can you consent to something that is a basic need, right? So, like, when we look at those kinds of transactions, they they give us a good picture of like how society also
mm,
like promotes this. And I again, if we don't look at this from like a society, like the systems are the problem, and we keep saying people are the problem, that's where we keep missing the mark,
mhm,
because the systems are what perpetuate these instances from happening. And they say that that guns and drugs are like the number one criminal enterprise, and then they say that like trafficking's the second. I don't believe that. I think that because you can more generally estimate drugs and guns, that's the only reason why I think they put it higher, because they can pinpoint that more. But
Hmm.
you have to think like a person can be sold over and over and over again. And that's why a lot of people switch from selling drugs and guns to selling people, because the person is a renewable resource. You know, you can keep using that person over and over again. You can't do that with drugs. Once the drugs are sold, once the gun is sold, can't really do anything with it to make extra money, right? So with trafficking, not being able to, I mean, we have such a huge range of estimates on how much people make, traffickers make when they are trafficking people. And there's so many forms of trafficking that I don't think we could ever actually get a good monetization. But I know for a fact that if they thought about it from the point of a person is like a reusable resource, they would absolutely put it as the number one criminal enterprise for sure.
Oh, I would think so. Absolutely. Especially when it can go underneath the radar so easily as opposed to drugs and guns don't.
Yeah,
People pick up on that stuff like right away.
exactly.
What are some like ways to, I don't want to say to not be trafficked because that's not what we're going for here, but like some ideas that maybe you are being trafficked, that you're not even picking up on. I know you mentioned some earlier, but what are some other ways to know?
Yeah, if someone is in your life that is, you feel like things are transactional between you and them. Not saying that's always the case, but that is one really good example. If you are feeling like this person's interactions with you are transactional, you could be being exploited. Um, the other thing is traffickers pick up on your vulnerabilities and your insecurities. So, speaking life into yourself, having people around you that speak life into you, and having a support system, whatever that looks like, even if you don't have familial support, having at least one other person that can support you and love you, and you can talk to them and you trust them, can help you through those vulnerabilities, and making sure that you have like a second set of eyes on the experiences that you're having,
Mhm.
because that's their biggest thing, is like once they sniff out a vulnerability and they know that they can be the void filling that you were saying before, like once they know they can fill that void for you, that's what they run with, and you'll never see it coming. It's so covert and so just so underground, low key, I guess you could say, that it's one day you just wake up and you're like, how did I get here? How did I get here? That's another really good question to like to think about. Like if you find yourself saying, how did I get here? Maybe you're not being trafficked, but you could be being exploited, because it's
Mhm.
like it feels like such a whirlwind of like, okay, this person met my needs. This is so great, so romantic, so much fun. And then all of a sudden you're like, what is happening right now? Like where am I? What am
Yeah.
I? Who am I? Losing yourself in it too, which back to my original point of like the grief of my identity and like who I felt like I had to be in that space.
Mhm.
If you find yourself asking, I don't even know who I am anymore, I would really look at the people around you and really take inventory of the kinds of vulnerabilities that you have, and seeing like, is there anybody in your life that is taking advantage of those vulnerabilities in you?
Absolutely. That's great advice. Um, I think that's great advice for everyone 100% of the time. Like 100% of the time. Understanding, I'm a big proponent, like in the grief world, of knowing yourself, of understanding yourself, knowing how you tick, how you respond, how you react, how you like just do day-to-day things. Because in the grief world, you don't really know what you're made of until you have to do something that is like it's going to be against your own like oh my gosh, I have to do this or else.
Yeah.
And with me, it's like burying my daughter, burying my granddaughter. Like, I have to keep going because I have children. I have a marriage. I don't want to lose all of this because I can't, you know, move through these steps or move through to a safe place for myself mentally, physically, emotionally. Um, and it's, it's challenging. Like, I think every person needs to sit down and think about a lot of people. So this might be a little off topic, but a lot of people, my family I'm speaking of in specifically, they have such a hard time with being alone with their thoughts
Mm.
because they have not conquered the mindset issue. And I know you talked about the body issue, um, but I know that the mindset plays into it just as well. Probably maybe in your world, maybe not as much, but in my world, it's like top of the line. And then the body as well, because you have to, first you have to stop the thoughts from careening down this path. And then you have to, express those emotions that are coming up at the same time, and figuring out how to do it in a healthy manner that's not going to harm anyone, that's not going to like cost you a relationship, unless that relationship actually needs to go bye bye, whatever. And then that's a good thing. Or, just being able to know yourself so that when you're in these situations, you don't get exploited and you don't get taken advantage of and you don't get because you already have established a firm foundation. And I'm just amazed that they can't sit with their thoughts for like 5 minutes. They have to have some sort of a noise in the background. And I'm like, I don't need any noise. Me and my psyche, we're compadres. Like,
Get that.
we tight. We tight.
Absolutely. And I mean, that goes back to your point of like being able to trust yourself, because the reason that people can't sit with their thoughts is because they don't know where their thoughts are going to take them. They're like, I don't know what I would do if I just sat with my thoughts. So I need something external to keep me busy so that I don't have to go back there. But I think that there's a really big connection between mindset and your body, because our responses, those trauma responses, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, those start in the body. They trigger some emotional response, and then the emotion turns into a behavior. So
Mhm.
if we can recognize when our body has sent a signal to our brain about a certain emotion, and we can stop ourselves and create space between the emotion and the action, that's how we start changing the ways that we respond and start actually being able to work through those things. But a lot of people don't want to take any space. That takes brain power, that takes bandwidth to create that space between the emotion and the action, because normally we just go, oh, I feel this, I do this. But if we
Yeah.
can extend, it's just even a couple of seconds, if you can sit there with that emotion before you actually act on it, you will be so surprised at what you stop doing in response to your emotions, even just with a couple of seconds of space. So it's really, truly amazing what that can do.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think to go along with that point, it's that space that you're talking about. It's that pain of, oh my gosh, I have to think about this or I have to feel this. I have to sit with this for, 5 heartbeats longer than I want to. Instead I just need to like, oh, those people that like they think it and out the mouth it goes. And it's like instead of just saying, does this need to be said?
Is that an inside thought? That maybe should be an inside thought.
Right. You know how you use your inside voice and your outside voice? Is this an inside thought or an outside one? Is it going to help or is it going to hurt? Um, because you can still be very blunt and very to the point, but not be cruel. There's a big difference. And it all, like you mentioned, it's a couple heartbeats, a couple seconds, with sitting with that and thinking, does it or does it not?
Yeah. And what's the truth of this emotion that I'm feeling? What's the truth of this? Like, because that the truth, when you can face the truth, you can start to trust yourself more too, because then you're like, oh, I'm getting to the bottom of why this feeling is existing. And then if I can trust that I'm actually going to stop and think about this instead of bypassing it and trying to push it away, then I
Mm-hmm.
can actually move through it instead of having it come up later, because inevitably it's going to come up again.
Gonna hit you.
It's probably going to be in a time that you really wish it wouldn't have. So might as well sit with it while you have the space for it, or at least if you can create the space for it to just sit in it a little bit, so then it doesn't come up later at an inappropriate time. And then you end up hurting the people around you because of those emotions, especially grief. Those 5 stages, and one of them being anger. Like, oh my gosh, the things that I
When you
said,
go back to,
oh my God, like if my words were daggers, people would be dead. You know? And so if I would have had the ability and the skills to kind of process those emotions, and especially my grief in all of the different things, then I wouldn't have taken the things that people said and did outside of me externally, like personally. And then
yeah,
I wouldn't have felt like I needed to say those things that were hurtful to them in order to make myself feel better, because again, misery loves company. And that's not always a bad thing, because sometimes you do need that camaraderie and bringing people
mhm,
around you in your grief. You just don't have to pull them down with you into the
right.
grief. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. I love that. It's it's such a unique dynamic, I think. Like I come from the business side, so being an entrepreneur, and I always thought that, when I was younger before I became an entrepreneur, I'm like, I don't need no damn self-help books. I am perfect the way I am.
I know everything.
And then, not that I knew everything, but just the fact that I'm like, there was just a world that I had no idea about. And mindset was one of them. I'm like, I don't need to know how to be a person. I'm already a person. I'm good. I donate. I help people. I do this, whatever. But I was not speaking to the whole the inner voice that goes along in that head that can totally destroy you in like 3 seconds because you're your worst critic. Like, well, of course this is going to happen to me because I'm XYZ and blah 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 blah. And then you're like, you set your own self up for a lot of this, emotional barrage of, shitstorm that you're now in, and
Yeah.
I don't know. After I became an entrepreneur, I think that's one of the biggest catalysts that helped me through the grief of, my daughter and my granddaughter and stuff, was the mindset portion of it. And then figuring out that knowing myself, it comes down to knowing myself, because I know that I cannot just sit in a room and discuss things and have that be my okayness. I can't do it. I
Yeah.
have to be doing something constructive, whether that is spray painting something like, I don't know, an object or whatever, or whether I am, writing or drawing in the sand or something like that. I can't just sit in a room and talk to people like a lot of these therapies do, or like a lot of these group situations do. And so that was one of the reasons why I shied away from it for so long. And I still haven't been to one because that's not for me. So I'm like, oh, what is for me? If that's not for me, then what is for me? And if it's not there, how do I create it?
That that part right there. There's the reason that I even have the position that I have at the nonprofit I work for is because we knew we needed like some sort of like mental health support, but before that we had very structured clinical therapy options, and also the previous directors in that role were licensed mental health counselors and
Mhm.
therapists and things like that. So for me coming in with none of those credentials other than being certified facilitator, um, for me, when they wrote me into this grant, it was on the premise of so many survivors, and this actually applies to anybody, but for our organization, we work strictly with human trafficking survivors, we were noticing that people were asking for other services outside of clinical therapy because they're like, I can't keep talking about this. Like, there's
I need
nothing.
solutions.
Thank you. Exactly. And there is so much benefit to therapy. I will never say that that is
Right.
not, it's a wonderful thing. I just don't think it's the only thing that is needed, especially when you're talking about complex traumas, especially when you're talking about things like grief or like sexual trauma, things like that. Those need more body-based somatic services, and we just didn't see that. And of course, when you're in the grant world, there really wasn't a lot of grants available, so it was kind of like I had to be the first one to kind of bring this on as a consultant, and then now with my holistic director position, being able to go to the emergency centers and the medical centers around here, and actually getting our very first grant for from a medical service provider, which is crazy because they're
That's
the largest
amazing.
one. It was wild because you did not see medical uh, medical people supporting holistic stuff. They were like, no, clinical.
Yeah. If you don't have a doctorate or, alphabet soup behind your name, then yes, I agree with that. I, for one, have never been to like a therapy one in that sense because I am the type of person. Now, I'm going to preface this because for some people it works amazingly well.
Absolutely.
But for me, I want someone who's been in my shoes and done and knows what I'm feeling and the hardships that I'm facing. And so a lot of the times you don't get those people in those roles. They're in there because they want to make a difference and they do make a difference. It's just not a difference for me and how I learn. But it took me a long time to figure out how I learn and how I like heal myself and move through the things that I move through. And I just know a classroom setting it's never been me.
I feel that. I feel that. And I call myself a somatic alchemist, but that is me. I'm an alchemist, but I also believe that other people, like you are your own alchemist, right? And in
Absolutely.
my work, I preface this with like, this is somatic self-healing. Because I know that I am not your guru. I know that I am not here to fix you or save you. I'm here to bring up these skills that you already have that you just didn't know you had. And especially working with grief and complex trauma, it's a whole other ball game, I think, with those specific emotions and those specific things, because I feel like grief especially will change your body chemistry. Like the exhaustion, the fatigue, the lack of
The
motivation,
thoughts.
the mindset, exactly, all of that. Grief brings so much of that up that is so heavy, and I personally feel like it does it in a way that no other emotional frequency
Mhm.
brings it up. So yeah, I'm just so excited that you have this platform to talk about this, because I think that this is a very specific emotion that a lot of people are trying to move through and have no idea how to.
I think people feel like they're alone in it, like, because it's so I mean, everyone knows that there's grief out there. Not that we talk about it, but we know it's there. Like, we know we're gonna die at some point in time. We just don't know when, and we don't talk about it. Um, and we have, you just feel isolated. Like, when my daughter passed, I felt isolated. Like, not because people were telling me nothing was there, but because in my own world, I felt isolated, just because of me. Not nothing else, but me. And that was an emotion that I had to uh, I had to figure out, like, why am I feeling isolated because of this? Is it because I have not reached out and connected well with people? Because I have not built community with people? Because I have not, all of these things. And of course, all of those were true because I'd moved around. So I never had to build community because I never had to build community. We always moved. And so for me, it was I now have this big community. I don't know what to do with it. I'm at a loss. I'm shutting down because this traumatic things, and I know there's people that would help me, but it's like, I don't want to be weak. I don't want to be less than. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to fill in the blank with whatever you're feeling. But it was a prison of my own making at that point in time, which, when you're in grief, becomes a problem if you don't address it, because then you will be taken advantage of. You will be. It's 100%, because you're feeling like, I need something to alleviate this pain or to make me feel whatever it is that I need to feel, or that I think that I need to feel because of whatever the circumstances are surrounding everything. Um, yeah, so it's a lot.
It really is. And I think also like there's in my experience, there's a feeling of like no one will ever be able to understand how I feel about my grief. Like, who is going to understand how I feel? And not that this is like, oh, everything is about me, but even like I'm sure even with your husband, he probably experiences grief completely differently than you did, and the other
100%.
people in your family, So like, how can I come to someone and hope that they understand exactly how I'm feeling? And I can imagine how, well, not even imagine, I understand how isolating that is, because it's like you, from my perspective, with all of my experiences, of course, the connection that you had with your daughter and your granddaughter is not a connection that anyone else can understand. And so, like, how can we expect someone else to hold us in that way if we ourselves cannot hold ourselves? So not only, like you said, community is great, having other people around you and going through the grief with people who also knew them. And also for me, like understanding that my grandmother and my mother's passing and all these different things that are leading up to my
Right.
own lack of identity, all of that, to have someone else understand that in that way, no one can understand it like I can. And I
Right.
need tools to give myself, or I need somebody else to teach me the tools so that I can figure this out for myself, because I know
Right.
that no one can figure this out for me. I have to do it myself. And that leads back to our conversation about trusting yourself.
100%. I think all roads lead back to trusting yourself. Just because I mean, if you can't trust yourself, who can you trust? Like, that's the age old saying. Like, but it becomes so that thought alone can become extremely toxic if that is the only thought that's going through your head. And so for me, when I met my husband, I had lived a life, as mine. We'd moved, we had done all these things, and I had never been in one place for longer than like 3.5 years. Went through, I don't know how many different school systems. I think I quit in 11th grade and I'd been to like 16 different schools, 17 different schools, like all across the states. And when I met him, and he has not, we live in the same house he grew up in. Like, so like we have these opposing things, and I'm like, no, I need to try, I need to be free. I'm like, this feels very restricting for me because I've never lived this long in a place. My parents were great. I loved my parents, had a great childhood, but it was the community building aspect that I didn't have. Um, and not to mention, my parents were married for like 35 or 7 years or whatever. My father passed. So they had a great marriage, long-lasting marriage, loved each other very much, but they never fought in front of me and my brother. So I didn't know how to handle conflict at
Ah,
all, not to mention I don't know how to build a community because, all those things. So my first husband, it was just a matter of time before we were exes, because he would pick a fight with me and I would know how to handle the confrontation. No idea.
right.
And so it was one of those having to learn the things. And I just thought that, okay, well, it's got to be the same thing as what my parents have. Like, it has to be. Like, it's the only model that I know. Why is this not working?
and then you feel like you're broken. And then you
Exactly.
go through this whole stuff. So it's just, and then you become like, I'm never going to have that happen again. I'm going to be only rely upon myself. I am not going to have to rely upon anyone else. I'm going to figure everything out on my own, which is very toxic because then you further disconnect yourself from people around you that want to help you.
Exactly. I also feel like the the more you trust yourself, not the more you isolate yourself, but the more you
Right.
trust yourself, the more you'll be able to trust others because no one you can't manipulate me if I trust my own discernment. You can't
Correct.
do anything to me that would be harmful because I already know like what signs to look for. I have experience. I've regulated around seeing patterns in things. Like that's the one wonderful thing about trauma is it gives you a superpower in pattern recognition. So
Yes.
it's like the more I trust myself, the more I can trust others because what you can't do anything to me that would hurt me because I know how to heal after it. And I know I've been through stuff that I can heal from way worse than anything you could probably do and say to me.
I love that. I've loved this conversation. It has been so like eye-opening. It's I think a lot of the times, again, we feel like we're on our own thing. Nobody understands us. Like we have all of these pinpoints in our life. Um, and so a little off topic, but I'll wrap it up here in a second. But I'm writing a book. I'm writing another book. And I was telling a good friend of mine, I said, every time I start to write the book, I always talk about my childhood. Always. Because I'm like, there, and then she's like, well, why? I'm like, I don't know. Because this book is about grief and it's about loss and it's about all of this. But I feel like I have to keep telling people about my childhood. And there's a reason why. Like, why is it that I feel people need to know about my childhood? Once sat with that for probably about a week, I realized they don't. I do. I need to sit with it because I need to figure out the issues that I had with my childhood. Even though my childhood was great and loving, like you don't get out of childhood without scrapes and scars. You just don't. Nobody does. Um, and it puts you on a path to seeking more or less or whatever, whatever the issue is. And for me, it was the building the community aspect. When I sat down with that and realized that, yes, I've lived in this place with my husband for almost 19 years, I had not built community in those 19 years. Like that's a huge revelation to be finding yourself because I am constantly surrounded by people. Like all of his friends and family are here. I don't have any friends from childhood, none. Um, And so everyone that I've ever met has been since I've lived here. And so it's like, oh, well, build community. You don't need to talk about your childhood. You just need to build community. You need to like just dive in.
I love that. What a beautiful revelation for you to sit through and be like, wait a minute. This is a recurring thing. Again, the pattern recognition of trauma is an amazing gift. And then to be able to be like, oh, now I get it. And it's beautiful because it's in support of your
Yeah,
grief.
it
Beautiful.
is.
Beautiful.
100% is because both of these books, I felt I had to talk about my childhood so that people would understand me.
Right.
People don't have to understand me. I need to understand me. And to understand me, I have to dive back. And so it's the same thing with the trafficking and stuff, understanding you and understanding, the areas that you need more support in, so that it doesn't happen either once or again and again and again. Um, but trafficking is so vast and varied.
And
I
it
mean,
affects
you
us
ask
all.
my children, they're getting trafficked by their jobs every day. I'm like, stop it.
Controversial opinion warning. I believe that the systems they look if you look at the pimp to exploited relationship and then you look at the structure of
They're
current
the
employees in
same.
America. It's the same thing. Okay. I'm just saying. Okay.
And then
I'm
the
just saying.
society tells you you're going to keep up with the Joneses, so let's go ahead and make more money. Well, now I've got to get a college education, which what costs what? Money. I need to buy a house, which costs what? Money. I need to get a car, which costs what? Money. I need to have insurance because it costs what? Money. And then to afford all these things, you must get a job, which keeps you bound.
Hello.
I think this is going on a very different topic now.
It definitely is, but that's okay. That's grief in itself right there. Okay.
Yes, understanding your real position in life.
Yeah, but I think it's so beautiful that, we can have these candid conversations and you being able to like bring this forward because like you said, no one really talks about these kinds of things. And I don't know if I've ever talked about my trafficking experience through this specific lens. So this was beautiful. So I'm just so grateful for this conversation.
You are so welcome. I had a blast having you on here, and to even talk about the trafficking. I had invited another lady who was, she was a underage marriage, I think it was a child marriage.
Yeah.
And she's big on talking about it on TikTok and everything. And I sent her a message and she replied back and she's never reached out to me.
Oh.
She has never done, and I'm like, I don't know. Maybe she's not ready to speak on that at this moment. And maybe, it's always future. It's always future. You can always come back in the future, whatever. And so, but I've loved it. I've loved the conversation and the whole like narrative around it because it's so easy to get caught up into something like that. And it could have been easy for me too, as well. Although my father, I think, was part of the mafia and would have probably killed someone.
Right.
Maybe that's why they were scared. I
I love
mean, yay.
We do love that.
But any final words that you'd like to leave our listeners with in regards to grief and trafficking and all of those things, or any
Yeah.
of those things?
My biggest thing is really finding ways to extend your confidence. And confidence is a choice, okay? There's no specific qualifications you need to be confident, but in order for you to not be manipulated, you do need to know yourself and also to be able to have that confidence in yourself, knowing and trusting and being able to stand up for yourself in situations that you feel like are not in alignment for you. So that is my biggest thing is and also for anyone who has children, because I know trafficking can be a really scary topic when we think about like the children, instilling confidence and self-worth in your children is going to be the number one thing to keep them from being exploited. So if that is a concern of yours, start really speaking life into them and building their confidence and their self-esteem, because that is going to be their biggest protection against being exploited.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, because we didn't even get on the topic of children, but yes. Yes, start them out when they're young. I agree with that. Thank you so much for being on here. And if listeners, if you got anything out of this, or if you feel that someone you know is being trafficked, please share this episode with them. Get them in touch with Quintina. All the things. Share it, like it, subscribe it, and just watch out for your fellow humans. Make sure that they're good. Make sure that you're building community. Make sure that you're understanding and knowing yourself. Big key tips. And thank you again, Quintina, for being on the podcast. And I'll see everyone in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to this special episode of Release. All the links plus a few extras are posted in the show notes below. And if you think someone you know could benefit by listening to this episode, please share it with them. And as always, keep going, keep being, keep doing. You are amazing.